Hello and welcome back. Here we are in week 10. Break was week 9. Now we're in week 10 and we are taking on chapter 9, the internet. And then next week, going into AI. And probably, as far as modern history is concerned, one of the greatest and most influential aspects of technological advance that has significantly affected our society is, of course, the development of the internet. And I put in there a timeline to take a look at that. I think it's absolutely fascinating. The original network of computers put together for military and security purposes within the government, the internet very closely aligned within policy to the interstate as a way to transfer information across the country. And then of course the invention of the World Wide Web by Timothy Berners-Lee on as he was working for CERN, and then the .com thing, meaning commercial. That's what the .com stands for, and how that has transformed our lives for the better or for the worst. I mean, certainly our access to information has never been anything like it is now. Access to other people. I mean, all the positives of that, but it's a library of information that is largely um, self-checking, we could say. I mean, there's certain places you can go, are peer-reviewed and whatnot, but people can post whatever they want, and so it's a user beware type of technology. So I go into that. I go into a little bit of the history because it's essentially an interesting history to me. Is the Tim Berners-Lee coming up with the WWW protocol for essentially creating a network of computers across the world so that scientists can share information for each other very quickly. Created hypertext markup language (HTML), the transfer protocol that we now have HTTP, TCP/IP, all of these different initials that we see in terms of transferring information and files across these different networks, and then encapsulating that essentially into a graphic interface that becomes easy to use and easy to learn. Now, just to put this in terms of time frame, when Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, he went off and created a company called Next, and they came out with one product called the Next Cube, which was a advanced object-based operating system operating on hardware that Next also created, not too different from his original plans with Apple. Um, Tim Berners-Lee used a Next computer to create the web as the first web server with that graphic user interface. And right around that time is the time that Steve Jobs got rehired, was heading on his way back to Apple. At the same time, he had purchased Pixar and had begun work on Toy Story, the original Toy Story. Now, it was still quite a long time before Toy Story came out because the computers that rendered that particular movie were antiquated by the time, by not antiquated at the time, but certainly not as fast as the computers we have in computer animation nowadays. But just this is rich modern history happening within people's lifespan of the web being created on this computer by a person who's still around. Tim is still around, is still a very strong advocate for a web that is much more usable, much more friendly, um, much more managed in terms of its content, so that it becomes a reliable and safe place to people do research and whatnot. So his work itself um, is pretty amazing. Now, there's a section in the course book I tell you about what futurists, basically individuals try to predict the future, are trying to say about technology and the information superhighway and all that. And we can look at this. This begins on page 151. We have the digital future. What are we looking at in terms of changes coming up in our society here? This is from the Pew Research Center, one of my favorite places to go to get data like this, and just goes through a whole bunch of different things about what we're seeing in terms of the effect of information on our society. I also introduced you to Project Liberty, which is closely aligned with Tim's work. I think he's on the board of directors of Project Liberty, and about creating a safe internet. Now, discussion B has to do with those digital future ideas. As we can discuss some of those things that are coming up in terms of changes in our society. Discussion A actually refers to a book that I came across quite a while ago called The Shallows: What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. And what this book actually really got into is from Nicholas Carr, and it got into reporting out a lot of the studies that have been going on in the European regarding how digital devices have been changing the way people process information. And I have to tell you, I read this book, and I'm really thankful I read it during the summer because I had enough time to process it. For a bit of time, I thought I was, basically leaning my ladder up against the wrong building. Very big into the integration of technology into the classroom, the use of the internet, digital technologies. Fast forward, all of that stuff. I read this, and it caused me pause. Basically, a little bit of an identity crisis, looking at how technology is best used, how to understand technology, how it affects the way people think. And these are things that I see today in terms of basically relatively shallow level thinking as an automatic sort of expected response to having such large amount of information available to us so readily. I guess in some ways I've internalized this into my own life as sitting around this is just a conjecture, but you're sitting around the table and someone says, what was the star of that movie? Blah, blah, blah. And prior to the information wave that we have, we'd all sit around scratching our heads, trying to come up with that name of that person, and looking for cues. What about this? What about that? Any other movies they were in, just trying to clue that in. And nowadays, we can solve that problem very quickly. I'm extremely good at using Google. Put the movie in, star of blah, 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 and I get the name in seconds, and we move on to the conversation. Now, the general sort of question that comes up within The Shallows, the book, is, do we lose something in that process? Do we lose something in the exercise of the mind, fish through its memory banks to try and find something that we now don't have to do that because we have this readily available encyclopedic source of information? And the question is, what does it do to our thinking? Does our thinking and cognitive processes undergo a certain atrophy, or maybe just simple laziness? I just don't want to put that effort into finding out that trivial piece of information. I don't want to go through the pain of it bugging me that I can't find that information, yet there might be a loss that's going on. So it begs that question. The Shallows, the book, I encourage you. I didn't require it. I didn't add it to this tag. I've thought about doing that. Maybe next year I'll add it as a required reading in here, because I think it's a profound question for us all to deal with in terms of our personal relationship with technology. So what I'm asking you to do is to get to know the book as much as you can, looking up online, looking at what I've written about it, and consider the idea that technology might be interfering with our ability to think, our ability to problem solve, because the answers are so readily available. Some very interesting studies that they mention in there. They're now a little dated, kind of has to get updated. How are things going right now? But I believe if there's anything direction it's going in, it's continuing in the direction that raised the concerns within The Shallows. So, discussion A, I'm asking you to consider those ideas. Discussion B, discuss the digital future that's in there. And in the quiz, I'm asking you to contemplate your own addiction to internet technologies: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. all of the different technologies on there. Do they, you know, and essentially the test kind of asks you questions about the ways in which you work with that technology. Ultimately, and I have to qualify this, an addiction is a problem, it's a mental health issue when it interferes with other parts of your functioning. So if you're able to consume massive amounts of internet information, aside from maybe what's happening as described in the shallows, it's not a problem unless it starts interfering with your work, your relationships, whatnot. That's a reflective type question. What I'm asking you to do is take the test. What did the test tell you? And just take it on its face value and then evaluate, is it ultimately affecting the way that I interact with people, ultimately affecting, my ability to isolate, my ability to avoid work or maybe procrastinate or something like that, and taking a real look at the usage we have of this very, very addiction enabling medium that we have called the internet, particularly social media, particularly, to tell you the truth, YouTube, places. That's a deep rabbit hole that has been shown to draw people in. I'm posting this on YouTube. It's a very, very effective tool, I think, for communicating, but it can also be a very, very deep hole for people to come into. I also find myself every once in a while I'll do um, those little short videos on Facebook, and you just go from one to the other. And I have literally lost hours of time doing that. Just had to stop because I was falling asleep and just realized how much time had gone by. So I am personally very aware of the draw of these technologies. So I'm asking you to take that test, do some contemplation about the role that kind of media plays in your life as we're contemplating the massive, massive effect on our society, the development of the internet. So enjoy that history. I hope you have the same sort of interest in the history of these technologies that are in there and read all that. It's all kinds of great information and names and places and significant events that happen in our lives that have to do with this ubiquitous thing that we have called the internet. So all right, you take care, have a great week, and I'll see you online.